free to sin in the eschaton. This is one that I have published on called The Assurance of Things to Come. And here I argue that in the eschaton, we will voluntarily, in libertarian freedom, say to God, confirm our characters such that we will be completely holy. So this Nazarene school will be entirely sanctified. In the Eastern Orthodox tradition, it's called theosis, divinization. So we believe that that will be the end result, after which you might say then we'll have a compatibilistic freedom of some kind. We will not have the freedom to sin any longer, but that's because we will have gone through this process and made the decision to go in that direction. So I don't think that we have to follow Origen, who postulated that there would be, times of people falling out of heaven and leaving and coming back, and restoration, that sort of thing. I don't think we have to go in that direction. Your definition of freedom is true freedom, and I'm not sure I cut it all down, so please correct me if I'm wrong. True freedom is persons in relation. Man, I love that. That was right on, baby. And that we should choose according to the right purpose as creatures of God. Well, here in the Gundarists, I make a distinction, which is an old distinction in theology, between formal freedom and material freedom. Formal freedom is the libertarian freedom to choose to do otherwise than we did. But material freedom is the freedom to do as God wants. And that can only come in a proper relationship with God. Time. Okay, thank you. Okay, I'm interested in you explaining a little bit more, because I just don't know your position about God's relationship to time. It sounded like you're saying God can be in time and out of time at the same time, which is a really nifty feat. So, what is your take on that?
Right. Well, it's just really a variation, I think, of understanding that God is both transcendent and immanent with respect to the creation. So as an Augustinian, I think that time is part of creation. Time began to exist, as well as space-time and energy, space, energy, and matter, and that God created time. So I think that the Spirit of God, in fact, the Triune God, can be fully, this is nothing new, can be fully present within time, but is not contained or circumscribed by time. Okay, but I don't subscribe to the view of God as timeless, because I believe that the God of the Bible is the living God. So there's dynamism, energy, movement, change, and so forth that I can only understand analogically here. But no, so that's my take on time. Now, let me explain my notion here, and this is explained in a chapter in the book, Frontiers of Science and Faith. They call it the a posteriori bilateral determination of future events. Okay, in other words, one view of Calvinism is that it implies a priori unilateral determination by God of all future events. So, I think that there are some events, in the universe, past, present, and future here, that can be determined unilaterally by God. And the Big Bang, ex nihilo creation, I think there are no other rational agents for God to consult outside the Trinity. But in terms of David being tempted to commit adultery, walking on the roof one afternoon, or Saul on the way to Damascus here, I think that what happened as a result of the future, I would postulate as a result of I would call an a posteriori bilateral determination of God. Okay, that does preserve genuine interactivity between God and human agency here. But I think, unlike the Arminian tradition, I understand the God of the Bible here to have, the right, the prerogative, and the goodness sometimes to actually intervene in the interior life of the human agent for that agent's own good. And I think that even though Saul of Tarsus had no inclination to become a Christian that afternoon, God had some other designs and actually changed his interior life. And I further believe that God was not surprised by the conversion of Saul. That, as a matter of fact, God knew that Saul would convert, and Paul later came to believe that he had been predestined or chosen or determined by God from before the creation of the universe to become the apostle to the Gentiles. So I would like to ask some further questions there and say that it's clear what you believe about open theism, and it's pretty clear what I believe about open theism. I don't subscribe to it. But if you had asked Paul, the Apostle Paul, or Romans 8:28, do you think that Paul had that? Do you really believe that Paul had that notion of God? Or do you think that Jesus' view of the knowledge of God was that of open theism? Or do you think that Jesus actually believed that God the Father had set a definite date for the second coming? Okay? If he had set a date for second coming, does that imply that God was willing to, quote, violate libertarian freedom? In other words, are we in danger of making a certain notion of freedom, libertarian freedom, more important than it ought to be? To inflate it to almost idolatrous proportion. In other words, are we reverse engineering a lot of biblical theology to fit a certain notion of libertarian freedom? And I think even as you interestingly indicated there in your remarks here, it seems that in the final state, libertarian freedom evaporates. Okay? Because you say that, well, we're going to freely choose here to give up our libertarian freedom and to give up our freedom not to become a Buddhist. So you're telling me that, well, I might have the freedom cognitively here to deconvert from Christianity, convert to Buddhism here, but that will not be the case in the new creation. Generally, Christians, yeah, okay, right. Yeah.
Okay, that's a lot. First of all, we think of created time as metric time, measurable time. And that's different from psychological time, the experience of time. So, in terms of measurable time, yes, we believe that's created. It doesn't come into existence until the universe as we know it. But the experience of the triune Godhead, living in love eternally, one moment after another in psychological experience, we think that's eternal. So that's who God is, or what God is like, kind of time. So we're not saying that God is in time, as though, you said, circumscribed by time. So God is in this container, there's a big container here called time. We dump God into it, we dump us into it, so the container's bigger than God and us. We're not thinking of time in that way, and the metaphor, or actually the preposition, is deceiving us. I should have my notepad.
Did Jesus believe,
oh, yeah.
Do you think that Jesus believed that God the Father knew the date of the second coming?
I don't know whether, what he is referring to there. Is there a specific date? Only the date, the hour the Father knows. Well, has the Father determined it at that point in history? I don't know. Maybe he has, maybe he hasn't. If God has determined it, does that remove libertarian freedom? I fail to see how that would remove libertarian freedom, other than if God says, okay, time as we know it is done, and bringing about a new heavens, new earth, that's God's unilateral activity. Now, you can say that impinges upon my libertarian freedom. Well, the incarnation impinges on my libertarian freedom. I mean, God does something that impinges on who we are. But that doesn't actually